My name is Andrew Keating, or my official title is Associate Professor Andrew Keating. I'm actually a member of the marketing subject area, and I have the great privilege of looking after the CEMS MSc in International Management program for UCD. And I've been in that role for about 11 years now, so over 11 years. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about SEMS, just about kind of the entry requirements and kind of what to expect. But actually, I think it's more interesting to hear from someone who's come through the program. So we're very lucky to have Sean Toner, come and join us. Sean graduated last year from the SEMS program. So it's not even a year ago. So he graduated in December from the SEMS program. So he can tell you something about his experiences, and we haven't paid him, so hopefully it's an honest opinion that he's going to give you. And then also as well, we're joined by Laura. Laura is part of the admissions team, and she's very heavily involved in with me in the interviewing of SEMS applicants. And then also as well, we're joined by Belle Blanco or Isabel Blanco, and Belle is the corporate relations manager for the SEMS program. So she can kind of, if you like, if you have any questions, she can talk to you about the corporate side of SEMS. So just to very quickly begin, if my computer allows me to do that. All right, here we go. So if you look at SEMS, essentially our SEMS program is essentially a 12 to 14 month program. It's full time. And you think about SEMS is a big global alliance that's where an MSc in international management that has common components and that is agreed upon by all these schools is offered across, as I said, 33 schools and six continents. So many of those schools or all of those schools actually are either the top or one of the top business schools in or universities in the country they're coming from. And if you've done your homework, you'll know what those schools are. But just to kind of give you a brief idea, as well as obviously having UCD, you have places like London School of Economics in obviously in the UK. You have Bocconi in Milan. You have ISADE in Barcelona in Spain. You have places like St. Gallen in Switzerland or Copenhagen Business School up in the Nordics, and as well as NHH and Aalto and SSE. And then you have great schools in the East, in Eastern Europe, like you have schools like VSC in Prague or SGA in Warsaw. And then you've got schools in Asia, like National University of Singapore and Tsinghua in China and HKUST or Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. That's also as well part of the alliance. And then you've got Cornell in North America and Ivy. And then you've got a couple of schools in South America, and then you've got a couple of schools in Africa, and then you've got University of Sydney as well. So it gives you a really good idea of the if you kind of the scale and the scope of this actual program. So if you look at SEMS, there's usually about 1,200 students at any one time studying this particular program around the globe in all 33 of those schools. It's a really big network, and as well as being having top universities embedded into it, it also has a corporate partnership model attached to it as well, where we have actually it's now 71 corporate partners are actually part of that alliance, and as well as having a number of social partners like the European Space Agency, which I know Sean did a project for at one stage, as well as the WWF, which is not the wrestlers, but the world. So more to do with what's WWF again? Oh my goodness, I've forgotten already. So it's a conservation fund for animals, if I remember rightly, and Transparency International, and then the corporate partners. You have essentially really big blue chip companies, many of them in management consulting, but companies like McKinsey and Bain, Accenture, BCG. And then you've got some of the tech companies like Google and Salesforce and companies like that. And then you have kind of CPG or consumer packaged goods or FMCG, so fast moving consumer goods companies like L'Oreal or LVMH or P&G. And then you've got like those people in financial services and essentially across all different realms of business. And the common denominator is mainly they want to have access to very highly talented students and work with very highly talented students. Okay. As well as having this corporate partnership model, there's also a huge alumni network that's spread around the world. So, what's very interesting about the SEMS program is it tends to be very sticky. And what I mean by that is is that students very heavily identify as being part of SEMS, not necessarily the schools they went to, but actually the actual concept of SEMS itself. So you find that the SEMS graduates, and maybe Sean, you can testify to that, although in your role, maybe slightly different in your new role, but the SEMS graduates tend to look out for one another. And it's a very, very nice thing to see because it's a very strong global network. And I've seen this in action over the last 11 years, and I've always been, I think, in awe. So, yeah, I think a very, very high level of respect for how those graduates look out for each other. And it didn't really matter what school or schools they went to. So, just to give you an idea of what it would be like in UCD, essentially you will spend one semester in UCD. Well, that could either be in the winter or in the spring. And then you will send another semester overseas in one of the partner schools, so one of those 33 schools. And with that, you spend it's either going to be in the winter or in the spring. There is also an international internship that's attached to it. So you do that for 8 weeks, and that is typically done in the summertime. Okay, so we've kind of changed a little bit about the rules, but typically that would be done in the summer or late summer. And then once you've done that, and you also with UCD, you have what's known as a business research insights assignment, which is essentially a dissertation. So you then will graduate. Okay. Just a key thing to remember is that we're the only school in Ireland that is allowed to run this program, and we're the only school in Ireland that will ever be allowed to run this program because it's only one school per country. Okay. So, what about the types of students? Sorry, just trying to get this to work. So, just an example of some of the corporate partners that we have involved. So, you can see a lot of very well known and blue chip names that are attached to this program. So, what about the actual entry requirements and what is required for you? So, what happens is that typically we get lots and lots of applications for it. We are very, we're quite selective in who we take in because it's a very highly ranked program. Because if you look at SEMS and you look at, let's say, the top 30 or so MSCs in international management around the world, you'll find that about, you know, a third, probably close to half of them are actually SEMS programs. They are really, really good programs. No matter if it's in UCD or somewhere else, they're typically the students have very good and positive outcomes from their study within SEMS. So what about the entry requirements? So you have to have a minimum of a 2-1 honors degree in business or finance or economics, or a minimum of 60 credits in your degree that are specifically focused on business. So a 2-1 is the very minimum that we would expect. You also have to be fluent in English and then have a high level in another language. So actually, it's now just a B1 for entry. So for entry, that's pretty good. And then you also have to take a third language. So you might have a third language already. And so if you have a third, let's say French at a B1 level, to graduate, you would have to bring it up to a B2 level. Or maybe you're going to take Italian for the first time, so it could be any language. So let's say you decide to take Italian and you've never studied it before. All you would need in this case would be an A1 certification, just to show you have some knowledge of the language. So that's kind of what's required. What you'll find is that many students, outside of those coming from the English speaking or Anglosphere, if you want to call it that, typically most students have at least three languages fluently. But you can see the language barrier is not as high as people expect. So it's B1, so you need to be fluent in English, have a B1 in another language, and then if you have another language, you can develop that a little bit further. So take it up one step. Or if you don't, you could take on a new language and just get at a beginner's level. Another thing to remember with our program is there is no GMAT required for entry to UCD. How the application actually works is you put an application into the admissions office, and then what we do is then the admissions team will screen the application for the suitability and fit. So whether you meet all the requirements and whether you would be a good fit for this type of program. Then you're interviewed by a panel for about 30 minutes. That panel typically is myself and Laura, or myself, Laura, and Richard. And so it's typically some combination of that. And then That's for 30 minutes. And then usually within a couple of days or a week, we'll tell you whether you're being offered a place or in this case, unfortunately, may have been unsuccessful. Okay. But typically, if you get to the stage where we're interviewing you, you're doing very well because we typically will interview maybe around 100 applicants from all those who actually put an application in. And then we offer about 50 places. So I keep the program, or we keep the program intentionally small because we want the students to have, if you like, the best possible experience where we can personalize it a little bit more than if it's a bigger class. Okay. So, what I'm going to do is, and just again, it's a mix, by the way, as well as study, we have lots of other things we offer too as well. So, for example, you have to do an applied business project. So, we have great interaction with corporates. We have Bell here, and we run skill seminars. So, they're about essentially developing key skills that you might need. For example, looking at networking, looking at sales, looking at different elements that you might want to develop. As well as that, we have lots of company visits, both in the first and the second semester, because in Ireland, we're very lucky in that we have a lot of European headquarters of certain types of firms, and we have a lot of graduates in there. And so it's fantastic that we typically are very good at getting students into the program. So if I look at UCD and what it's offering is it's first of all, it's part of that CEMS network. So we have that power of the 33 schools and the 70 corporate partners behind us. And then I suppose what we do really well is we make sure that we put the best people in front of, the most suitable lecturers in front. It doesn't always work, but that's what we try and do. So the best type of lecturers that would fit your profile. We also then have very strong alumni network because of a lot of more recent graduates being based here. We have very strong corporate embeddedness. And also we have a relatively small class so that we can personalize, if you like, and just to get to know you. So you're not just another number in a big class. Okay. So that's, I suppose, what we offer. And there's just some small examples of some of the company visits from last year. There's only like two or three photos, but we typically would have, I don't know, 4 or 5 company visits, usually, Bell, wouldn't that be right? Usually about 4 or 5 company visits a
For
semester,
a
if not
semester,
more.
yes.
Yeah, per semester, not a year, per semester. And that's just Accenture, that's CCHB before that. And there's another one to Personio. And so now for the main event, I'm going to hand you over to the person who can actually tell you about what it's really like, past me talking about it. So I'm going to hand you over to Sean. So Sean, the floor is yours. So please.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andrew. So yeah, basically, what is SEMS? I suppose the first thing you could say is that it's not like other masters at all. So obviously, while Smurfit offers a variety of different masters in a variety of different fields, I may be a little bit biased, but I would say it is entirely different to all the others, both in the amount that you put in and the amount that you get out of it. So really when I signed up to SEMS, I had just finished my bachelor's in international commerce in UCD. I really liked traveling abroad and I had a second language, so I kind of wanted to take that a step further and apply for a master's that kind of highlighted that and worked with that a lot. And what I got kind of after getting into that master's was a lot more than I expected. So I suppose one thing that you could definitely expect from SEMS is that once you finish your classes for the day, that probably won't be the end of your day. So, really, when you start with this group of people at the start of the semester, you do your classes together. Then you have this whole other side of it where you're going out together, you're having dinner together, getting to know each other, and really building the community, which is a real value of SEM. So, not just doing projects together, but also, as Andrew mentioned, getting to go to various companies. Like typical SEMS week could be, classes in the morning, going out to dinner together in the evening. You've planned some activities the next day, and then at the end of the week, you're getting a bus up to Belfast to go visit Coca-Cola and stuff tote bags with as much merchandise as you possibly can. So you are really getting a lot of fun alongside this important part, which is the studying. Um, I suppose for me, I would have done maybe a little bit less of a traditional route through SEMS. Um, Traditionally, you'd be looking at kind of more corporate careers or consulting. Yet SEMS really supports you if you want to be quirky and do something entirely different. So I was really interested in the EU, for example, and wanted to work through something like that. So when I did my exchange to Belgium, I was able to do an entire stream of EU policy. And crazily, my teacher for that class was the ex-Prime Minister of Belgium. So, like, it just goes to show if you don't necessarily want to go through the mainstream, you can still go to CEMS and have just as important education in something different. But again, like really the powerhouse of CEMS is your various corporate schemes like HR and marketing, supply chain, things like that, and as well consulting. So if those are any of the things that you're interested in, really important to take a look at CEMS and what CEMS can do for you. As well, I was part of the student board in CEMS. That gave me a lot of opportunity to travel. Not everybody gets to be a student board rep, so that's something to take into account. But I highly recommend putting yourself forward for it if you do get into SEMS. I got to travel to four conferences. It was really, really important to my learning with SEMS. So obviously, I had the classes, I had the skills seminars, and I had that community outside of it. But with this, I got to do a lot of work at a pretty high level internationally with this fantastic team of 32 other people from 32 other schools. And that was a really important part of it for me. So that's an opportunity that you would have going into a course like this. As well, you're getting a whole international exposure. Obviously, it's in the name and part of the classes, but something you don't think about is that when you go into the working world, traveling is a part of it. No matter what career you're going into, no matter where that career is, you will be traveling. And something that we got to do super early on was go to this career conference in Barcelona. Uh, I imagine it moves around every year, but when I went, it was in Barcelona, and you get the whole experience of packing your business suitcase, going off to an Airbnb, getting the suits on early in the morning, and going straight to an interview in these big black taxis with like five other SEMS people. It was very like, I don't know, has anybody seen the TV show The Apprentice? But it was super cool and definitely gives you a lot of skills that you wouldn't perhaps get in other masters offered in Smurfit. They're all good, but in my opinion, SEMS is resoundingly the best. Again, touching back on that extracurricular point, SEMS clubs are a huge part of SEMS. So you have the student board, classes, the community, but the community is really organized in SEMS. Basically, you have a club for each school, and each of those clubs will have, a president, a vice president, and then heads of the various committees doing things like marketing, planning events with alumni, and organizing days out, doing things like rubbish picking and things like that for kind of CSR activities. So again, your day does not end when your classes end in the classroom. You really have to commit kind of full time, and you will want to commit full time to a course like this.
Sean,
Uh,
how international is the class? How many different nationalities in the class typically?
to be honest, I don't even know if I could count. Like beside me, there was a German, a Finnish, Spanish, Italian. Like I think we must have had at least 10, maybe 11 or
It's,
12 in my
yeah,
class.
it's actually usually 12 to 16 in UCD,
Yeah,
and it's usually 12 to 16 nationalities. So it's a very international group.
which again is such great experience. Like you don't realize it, I suppose, before going into something like this, but it is different working with people from different nationalities compared to only working with people from your own country. That's a huge part of it as well. Like if I was to reflect back, like I had to spend an extra night in Copenhagen before catching a flight, and I had a Semsi there from my class, and I could stay over in their apartment. I like really want to go to Prague soon, and I know the first thing I'm going to do is think of what Semsis I know that are in Prague so they can give me loads of recommendations. Like you will literally have that network, not in Europe, but across the globe of those people that you can reach out to, which is so important having that many nationalities again in your class from day one. Yeah, I think that's everything for me.
Is there any questions that we need to answer here, or any questions or anything that anyone here in the audience would like to say? Just one thing to note, by the way, is that our program for this year is nearly full, and people will tell you that all the time. No, it really, really is. So if you're going to apply, you need to apply now because this program will be shut in the next couple of weeks because we are at capacity and we typically have to shut. We're very close to capacity, and typically we have to shut pretty much by the start of May just because of exchanges for overseas. So if you're going to apply, I would really strongly suggest that you do it in the next week because otherwise you're going to have to wait till next year. I think, Laura, that would be a fair comment. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And we actually do have some questions about the application closing date. So, yes, if you are applying for the September 2026 intake, so that's this year, you would need to apply in the next week or so, really by the end of this week, just because we are at the end of our application process. But we did have a question in the Q&A just about if you're looking at starting the program in September 2027. So for that application process, you wouldn't need to apply until the 1st of October
Yeah.
2026. So we're not accepting applications for 2027 at the moment. But yeah, as Andrew said, if you are thinking about this year, it would be important to apply by the end of this week. And Andrew, sorry, I have another question just for you here. Just somebody has asked, what's the difference between CEMS and doing an MBA program?
So an MBA program typically is for post experience. It's for post experience graduates. Well, this is more of a pre-experience graduate. So typically the age profile would be 21 to 25 within our program. They may have done a small number of internships or worked for a year. But they don't necessarily have the same level of experience. Also, if you look at MBA programs are typically for people who actually maybe haven't studied business. So you got engineers and people coming from medicine and the sciences and so on. And so actually what they're getting is a grounding, at a very good level into all the business topics. But if you look at SEMS is from graduates from business programs and from economics and finance. So it's a little bit more slightly defined. And so you don't necessarily have to do all the kind of basic stuff you would have to do. We just assume that you know that. I
Yeah,
think that would
and
be,
if
yeah, go on, Laura.
yeah, and if anybody is interested in more on the MBA side, we do have a webinar later on in our virtual open day as well. And just sorry for Belle, just one question, just in terms of what are the type of career supports students have? I know Shauna and Andrew have mentioned a lot of them already.
Yeah, so career supports, all students receive a couple of introductory sessions at the start of their semester, and then they have availability to the careers network here at UCD Smurfit. And UCD Smurfit is the only school within the university that has its own specific dedicated team. So you have career consultants, people who can help you with, interviews, CV, and also developing skills that they require for the workplace. So we organize, employer panels, mock interviews and CV reviews throughout the whole year to support students along the process.
Great, thank you, Belle. And we just have one final question, and it's for Sean. Sean, there are students here that might be starting the program in September. Do you have any advice for someone who is going to partake in the CEMS program?
Yeah. I would say if I had to condense it down to one thing, it would be however much you think you're going to participate, triple it. Like just literally give as much of yourself as you possibly can, you know. I feel like people say that all the time. But really like the more people you meet, the more friends that you build, the more you get involved, the more experience connections you get out of it. So I feel like SEMS is like brutal in terms of exactly what you put into it is exactly what you get out of it. And if that's a lot, you will really get a lot from it.
Thank you, Sean. That's great advice. So we're actually at the end of our Q&A and webinar. So we just want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to contact us in the admissions team. I'd just like to thank all the panel as well, our CEMS Academic Director, Associate Professor Andrew Keating, our CEMS Careers Manager, Belle Blanco, and also our CEMS alumni, Sean. And thank you all for joining today.